going to record now. So I want to thank the panelists for joining us. First we have Bob Flynn. Bob Flynn helps Indiana University explore, understand, and implement cloud-based technologies and innovation in support of the university's academic and research missions. His project portfolio includes Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Box.IU, Adobe, and Google. Flynn works with colleagues across the country to guide cloud technology adoption in higher ed, contributing to the eCar Cloud Working Group and serving on multiple vendor advisory boards, including Box, Google, and AWS. Next, we have Ricardo Chavara. Ricardo Chavara is a senior solutions consultant at Aptris, a service management consulting firm where he specializes in higher ed ITSM. He served as director of service management at Yale University Information Technology Services, where he worked on service management, process governance, and ITIL-based best practices. I just apologize, I'm a little distracted because the ding is annoying me, so I'll have to fix that next time. This is kind of a first go with us, so just please be patient as we stumble through this. But I'll have to turn off that chime because I think everyone's hearing that as well. I'll just move forward though. So he's worked in higher ed for IT for over 20 years. He's spoken on governance and service management topics at numerous events, including Educause, NerdComp, and ServiceNow Knowledge Conferences. He was also co-chair of the Educause IT Service Catalog Working Group. He pursued graduate work in philosophy at Yale and lives in Hamden, Connecticut. Next, we have Maribeth Stunkel. Maribeth Stunkel is responsible for delivery and lifecycle management of a number of cloud services at the University of Michigan, categorized as productivity and collaboration services, including Google's G Suite for Education, Box, and Code 42 Crash Plan. In addition to delivering these services to meet campus needs, she has also led development of enhancements for the campus offering, primarily through integration with other campus infrastructure and middleware. And last but not least, we have Chaz Grundy. Chaz Grundy leads a team of product managers at the University of Notre Dame, responsible for numerous products including Google for Education, Box, Crash Plan, Zoom, Qualtrics, and more. Together, his team ensures that these products continue to meet their ever-changing needs of campus. Chaz is co-chair of the Educause Connect Committee, leads the product management constituency groups and serves on several board and advisory groups. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to the panelists. You can see we have a set of 5 questions, so I'll go ahead and jump in on the first question. First question we're asking the panelists is, what is a service owner and a product manager?
All right, so hi, I'm Chaz. I'll take this one first, if that's all right. The way I look at this is that a service is a suite of offerings, usually some common set of things that the organization delivers. A product is simply one of those offerings. So the service, and I'm using the Educause eCar definition from 2015 as they differentiated between a service and a service. A service. Sorry, are we hearing me now?
A little better, yeah.
All right, sorry. So a service offering is simply one of the offerings within a service. So for instance, email might be your service, whereas Gmail is the service offering. Conferencing is a service. Service offering is is something like Zoom or WebEx and so on. And that differentiating between those is important because in my definition, a service offering, the person who owns and manages that is the product manager. And that's a very different role than the service owner. It might be the same person, it might not, but that difference there is that you're responsible for all of those offerings and how they work together versus just responsible for the one offering, the product that you're dealing with.
I would add.
If I could chime in.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Thanks. If I could chime in, I like what Chaz is saying, and I think my sense of those roles is also driven by the taxonomy and the same understanding from the eCar paper on service catalog. And I think of the service owner as thinking at a more strategic and business value point of view. So again, as the example of email, you might have on-premise Exchange and Gmail as the email offerings, and the service owner is looking at email as a service and understanding is the overall offerings that we're offering, are they meeting our needs? Are they cost effective? Are they need to be reviewed? What's the strategic direction we should be going? Are we going to decommission one of them or another? In a lot of university settings, different email services are available to different constituents. For example, when I was at Yale, we had Gmail for faculty and students. We had on-premise Exchange for staff. Actually, faculty could pick whatever they want because they're faculty, but we had different offerings for different constituents, and there was some rationale behind that. And the product manager, which is a role I've sometimes heard as also described as service offering manager, but that person was more tactical or technology driven. So there was someone who owned Exchange, someone else who owned the Gmail offering, and they knew it from a pretty thorough technology point of view in terms of making sure it was updated, patched. The person who owned Exchange understood why we were on Exchange and maybe was going to be thinking about moving us to Office 365, but could articulate why or we should or shouldn't do that. But they were sort of more narrowly focused towards that technology service offering. And so I think that's the difference in the role. And as Chad said, it could be the same person doing both, but there are different roles in that sense.
I also see one of the additional ways that this type of position is morphing is a lot of times now we don't own the service itself, and so we're managing a relationship with the vendor in two different directions. So we are trying to push our feedback and priorities to the vendor, and we're trying to manage expectations of our users with the rapid pace of change. Because a lot of vendors are doing agile development, so it's hard to move from the days when we had one big annual release that we could plan for, and we're getting changes every week or so. And some vendors do a better job of communicating those changes and better release management than others. And some of them are pretty high profile, and it becomes a challenge to manage your documentation, communication, keep your support people up to date and all of that if you're being blindsided. So that's an additional challenge for these roles.
But yeah, I think the general point of vendor management is also something that falls into the product manager or service offering manager role, that if there is a third party who is there for providing the service or providing support for that service, that's often part of that manager's role in terms of managing the relationship and understanding that they live up to their contract expectations. And in terms of negotiating that contract, that might be part of some, a higher level or more other people might be involved in that. But once the contract is in place, managing that relationship is also another important part of that product manager.
So to sort of round out what everyone else is saying, I found a paper from a few years ago talking about the role of a product manager in a provider perspective, like from the Google or the Box or whatever, the vendor's perspective. And it's described, I'm going to hold up a piece of paper here. It's described as, I don't know if that's coming across, but anyway, as managing the relationships between the developers, the business, and the users. I think for us, it's a similar relationship, only instead of developers, we have the solution provider. We have the Googles or the Boxes or the Exchange service, whatever it is. And the role of the product manager is to manage that white space between these three points on the triangle. And I thought that was, it's a little different for us, but it follows that same model of sort of being a translator between different areas that are important to the business and to the users and to the technologies. And I think that's a really key role of that the product manager plays.
Yeah, in our group, the phrase I use a lot is that the product manager is the CEO of the product. So the idea being that you are ultimately responsible for all components of the product, that from the technical delivery to the support, the training, the marketing.
Chaz, we're having a hard time hearing you.
I'll be right back with that. Carry on, please.
So I know a lot of the question number 2 was answered in question number 1. Is there something specific in question 2 that maybe we can emphasize or talk directly on?
Yep.
One
Well, I might add to it. Oh, go ahead, Mary Beth, please.
One thing I'd like to point out is that I know in our organization, we're sort of developing our maturity model in service management. And as we do that, we're one of the things that we're doing is trying to find consistent definitions for some of these terms. And in some ways, it doesn't matter what you call them as long as the work gets done. But in another way, it is important because words are how you communicate across the organization or across the campus. So it is important to decide how you're going to talk about these, and even better to use common terminologies and common definitions that you can talk to your colleagues across other campuses.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I love that idea of having a common framework, common terminology, because you know, while there is always some things that are unique to your organization and that you have to take into account, the more we can share in terms of standards and best practices, the better off we are in terms of communicating and being able to share ideas. And I mean, what I always loved about working in higher ed was that we were very willing to share ideas and communicate and extend best practices across our different organizations. And that's easier to do when you've got, if not identical, at least a very common framework and shared understanding. So that's a great that's great practice to follow. The other thing I would add, just in terms of this question number 2, you know, we touched on it already, but I think the you know, the difference in roles is also driven by the difference in what we think of a service and a service offering. And so, you know, whereas the example we're using of email, the service owner is going to care about how well is email meeting people's needs. And, you know, if you you know, read your idle books, which of course we all do, you know, the value is about, you know, how well a service does its job, you know, how well does a service do what it's supposed to do. And, you know, does it do what it's supposed to do, and how well does it do it? You know, has it got all the right features? Is it easy to use? Is it cost effective? And so you care about that in aggregate for all of the service, for all email on your campus, whereas a product owner or a service offering manager is really going to be looking at, is Gmail working really well, and how many incidents and requests and changes are we having to do to support Gmail versus someone else looking at it for Exchange versus someone else looking at it for, you know, whatever legacy system you haven't decommissioned yet. And each of those groups might have different, and make it very practical, each of those groups might have different service catalog entries or different incident queues and a number of incidents that are being tracked on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis. And they all roll up for the service owner, but each person is going to be able to say, we've got 5 incidents this week for this one, 30 for this one, and 10 for this other one. And so looking at that data and making decisions on that is something which you're going to do at different levels depending on what questions you're trying to answer.
So if you don't mind, let's go to a question, because I want to make sure we're not getting too far queued up in questions. This is related to question 1, question number 2. So Todd Jensen, University of Nebraska, is asking, do you have a recommendation regarding service delivery attributes to help make strategic decisions to, like, continue to invest, divest, decommission a service or a product? That's the first part of his question.
And could you repeat the first part of that? Those are service offering, service attributes?
Yeah, so he's looking at the service delivery attributes, and can it help to make strategic decisions to whether to continue to invest in that particular product or service, or decisions about just decommissioning, no longer investing, kind of thing?
Yeah.
If I could, can you hear me better now?
We hear you well, Chaz, yeah.
Excellent. All right. If I could ask Mary Beth to weigh in on this, because the work that Michigan has done with MESAs is something that I've wanted to carry across and would love to share with more of higher ed. I went to the Educause presentation on it at the conference, and it's fantastic. If you could speak to that for a moment.
So the Mesa is a tool that was developed by our enterprise architect team to sort of lay out the different services, the different products the different products in a service area, I guess we'd say, that are either active in that space in our environment or have potential to be active in that space. And it tries to provide guidance about what the, let's see how, you kind of caught me off guard here, Chaz. Trying to show what things are recommended for use. So someone's looking for, say, an email service or email platform to use. What are the things that are being supported well on campus that are recommended for use? There may be some that are in use on campus, but they're being deprecated, and so they're not recommended for use. And the MESA, MESA is actually an acronym, Michigan something or other, but it also has the shape of a mesa, the geological formation of a mesa, showing how things start. It's kind of like the hype cycle, but a little different, but the same idea of using a common shape to describe services. And so the goal is to use this tool as a way to describe a number of different services on campus, so that everyone on campus can take a quick look at a diagram and get an idea of what things are, what service offerings there are that are recommended for use, which ones are being deprecated, and what things are up and coming, and also gives them a framework for the conversation about what should we be looking at in this area. Does that kind of describe it for you, Chaz?
Yeah, I love the single view look at all of the offerings within a service, and the general sense of where they are in their life cycle. And that life cycle, I think, it's important to identify whether or not that's a piece that is part of the life cycle, because that's where the product is itself, the vendor-driven side of it. We have AFS, open AFS on campus still, and we're losing commercial support this summer. And so that drives part of where it is in its life cycle for us. At the same time, you might decide that you have a perfectly viable product that is out there, vendor supported, but it's no longer meeting your needs, or that it's being supplanted by another product that is better met. My team and I have been working on a framework or a toolkit to help figure out how to retire a service. And that's a huge question, because we tend to add a lot of stuff and not take it back away.
Yes.
I think
you're unique in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
We're the ones that have that problem.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
I do want to tie this back, the question itself, back to kind of our main topic here, and that is the role of the service owner. And to the questioner's point, I think that the service owner, in the past, if you ran a service, you were kind of heads down on making sure your service worked. I think in this newer role, it's beholden to the person to really have their heads up and looking at this entire space, because it changes so quickly. There are new entrants in there all the time. You can't just say, is my service up and running? You really need to see, is it's continuing to meet the needs that it was originally positioned for, or maybe its mission has shifted and there might be better tools out there now. So you have to be aware of the whole space that your service is covering.
In the commercial industry of product management, when you have product managers in a vendor or in a commercial space, a lot of your job is understanding what your competition is, what they do, what you don't do. That differentiation, that's important. And obviously it's because you're driven by profit and roadmap and development needs. And in our space, it's important because my faculty and staff and students want, and they have exposure to those same tools. And if I'm using Box and Google Drive and Dropbox is out here and it's doing something that people want, I need to be able to understand that and bring it back. And then I also need to be able to understand what else is popping up, why other vendors are doing what they're doing, how they all mash together. The service owner has that holistic view. The product manager generally is responsible for just one of those. But like I said at the beginning, sometimes those are one and the same people, or we're not fortunate enough to have that many people to differentiate.
Chaz, this is Mitch. So one question came up. Would you say then the product manager deals more with vendor relationship? Because the question that Todd is asking, is a product manager more keen to a business relationship manager or customer service manager, or more on the vendor side?
My answer to that would be you're responsible for making sure all of those things are addressed, whether or not you are the person to do that. So if you're the CEO and you come into your new company and you just got hired as the CEO, you might have to answer the phone to provide support to help out. But generally, that's not what you're expected to do. You're expected to make sure that's being handled. And there are times when you're negotiating a business deal as the CEO, but you also might have people that are doing that. As product manager, a lot of my role is to have the relationship with all of those areas and know where my strengths and weaknesses lie and where I have the resources to do it. I'm not doing the training. My team doesn't do the individual trainings on our products because we have a training team. In another organization, that might be exactly what you do. But usually our product managers are the prime contact for our vendors, overseeing, making sure that contract is meeting our needs, working with our legal teams, working with our procurement teams, doing the negotiating. We play a role in all of those, yes.
If you mind, I'm going to read one last question related to question 2, and then if we can move on to question 3. That is just simply, well, if it's simply, but Beth Rugg is asking, is the service owner or the product manager listed in the service catalog, or is both listed in the catalog?
Yes and yes.
It's assuming you have a catalog. So
Yeah, right.
that's all I'll say about that for my end.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Question 3, what kinds of services and products need this approach?
I think short answer is everything that you offer. But I think it's especially important to have this differentiation of roles where you've got, I think, complex services that have multiple offerings. So, to continue to use the same example of email, if you've got only one email service offering, which is almost unheard of in higher ed, but say you only had one email offering for the entire campus, the service offering and the service are virtually the same, and you could get away with not having that much of a differentiation of role. It may be the same person having roles, but where you're likely to have multiple email offerings under the service of email or email encountering, however you call it, I think it's really important to have that kind of differentiation in role, whether or not it turns out to be different people, but it's likely to be different people when you've got different technology offerings. And so I think higher ed IT tends to be very complex environments with interesting and challenging infrastructure and a wide variety of constituents. So you're more likely to have and need different types of product manager or offering manager roles.
I would say that I see it less likely that the role, at least in the way that we've been talking about it, would be used for like your ERP system, the large, cumbersome institutional cornerstones of technology. But the tools that have a diverse constituency group, whether it's your help desk software and you're out dealing with individual departments or groups, or your, as you say, your email system where you've got a different set of constituencies. I would put that on kind of the larger end of the scale, though, I guess. But the things that I see, the things that are in the more dynamic space, it's particularly important. But that's just maybe that's my bias.
Well, and I'd also say that it's more important for things where you're the people on your campus are the direct consumers of the service, as opposed to things that are delivered to IT shops on other IT shops on campus or things like that. And
that's a good point.
Yeah.
What we found was our first managed product at Notre Dame was Box, because we are very good at adding things and not taking them away. But the adding things is project. There's a process. We have that document. We do that day in and day out. We have hundreds of projects a year. And then it got to this point where we deployed it and said, okay, who's in charge of this thing? And we realized we didn't have an owner for it. There's no customer on the other end because everybody's a potential customer for it, because there's no clear customer. There's no clear customer voice coming back, driving our decision making. There was nobody internally that seemed like it made sense. We have a storage team, but they're engineers focused on spinning disks, you know, and their role and the job that they were doing is very different than the one that is needed to manage a cloud service like Box in an environment where everybody's a customer and everybody can just use it, and all the use cases are very different. And so we appointed somebody to be the product manager for it, run point with the vendor, talk to users, make sure there's training and support, and checking all those boxes. And then that grew to, oh, look at all the other services that fall in that same category. And every time you look around and say, who's in charge of this? And you don't have a good, clear answer, product management might be really important for that. But even when you do have a clear answer, product management sometimes is a set of practices that you can apply to service management and service delivery that is holistic. And it's not, how do I keep my service alive? It's not patching the servers. It's also, hey, do we actually have training and support? I mean, are we prepared? I mean, is somebody asking all these questions, and who's accountable for that?
Mm-hmm.
We did have a recent service issue with one of our services. The technical side was running well, but the customer experience wasn't. And when it came down to the service owner, you know, is having in this conversation, and somebody said, well, you're in charge of this. He says, well, I'm just in charge of the service. I'm not in charge of what the customer's experience.
Oops.
And you're thinking, well, who would be? and that's because I hesitate to say old fashioned, but more of a legacy approach to the technology delivery that's very oriented toward a technology stack, servers, patches, and integrations. I don't talk about monitoring and availability with my services as much as I talk about customer satisfaction, you know, and product roadmap. And that shift right there is why we've adopted product management as a term, as a differentiator for just service offering owner or service manager.
And interestingly, there's some models that reinforce this disconnect. So, you know, we have teams that have business analysts. They deal with the customers. They understand needs and things, but they're not really experts in the technology. They go back to the technologists and get the answers. And so there's got to be a little bit of a blending of the two, you know. And when it's vended, I guess the vendor's your person providing the technology and not standing up. You're not standing up the service, but it's got to have that balance of making sure the trains run, but also making sure you're aware of where the users want the trains to run.
And I think a lot of times what we need, and this is almost kind of getting into the next question, what makes a good one, is you have to be a translator. You have to be able to bridge that gap between the technology and the users and the business. All of those gaps, fill those white space between those gaps. So it's almost a job of a communicator or translator between those things and seeing things from those different perspectives.
Yeah, I like that idea of it being a translator role, sort of understanding how all the different pieces and constituents fit together, and what like the triangle diagram you brought up earlier, sort of being able to juggle all those three in the air and connect the dots. And getting back to a point you alluded to earlier, and part of what Chaz was saying in terms of what makes good product management or service ownership work really well, I think part of how are you answering the right questions? Are you doing the right things? Is, as an organization, you should have an idea of what are the things that are important to you. And it might be a set of core KPIs, a handful of metrics that you think, on a regular basis, we want to know, how well are we resolving incidents? Are we making changes that don't break the system? Or how quickly are we resolving, fulfilling requests? And are they, what's the customer satisfaction level with these? And track that on a regular basis, have targets and see how you're measuring against those targets, but then be able to differentiate those things and say, how well are we doing with this set of metrics applied to service offering A versus service offering B? And so if you've got Gmail and on-premise Exchange, compare the two. And over time, you'll see that you're either doing better on one, or one is more stable, or one has better customer satisfaction. And those are the things that should drive your question of, do we need to upgrade or replace or retire this service because it's not meeting our needs anymore? And so it becomes, you've got some real measurable data to compare and to answer those questions.
Yeah, I'd add to those metrics that you mentioned also things like user adoption and
right.
Activity in the services, not just tickets, because a low number of tickets could mean nobody's using it. So you also want to know what's the usage pattern like on
right. And have a consistent set of questions that you're asking and answering for each service. You can compare apples to apples.
Right.
So we have a question that came in, a great question about looks like scaling and a resource question. So the question is there like a magic number of FTEs to support a service, and does that number depend on the size of the service? So if it's like something like an e-car category of teaching and learning or infrastructure versus maybe a smaller service. So is there like some sort of magic formula?
I personally, it's very specific to the service. So, for example, here at Indiana, we run Box for over 100,000 active users, and we support it with less than one FTE. And yet, in our teaching and learning space, because of the complexity and the number of add-ons and the whitelisting, the marketplace, and all of this, our learning management team has multiple people just on the kind of the running the technology side of it, in addition to who we might have in tier 1 and tier 2 support answering user questions about it. So just the configuration space is a lot bigger. So my impression, my thought is that it's very service specific. Obviously, we love ones that require fewer people to run, but it's not always the case.
Yeah, I would echo Bob's points that it really is about the service, and I would say you always have one service owner whose name is who's the person who's ultimately accountable for the service, and one product manager who's accountable for that product. But that might be a team of 10 people behind it, or it might be that's a quarter of that person's time.
Right.
Depends on the offering, depends on the service.
And the vendor.
Yeah, and the vendor.
And like many of us, I mean, it's responsible for multiple services and multiple service offerings with the same role.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is that multiplicity that is going to depend on how much of a load it is to support and manage, whether you can how many of those you can handle. But but definitely to Chaz's point, each service has one point of accountability. Just a matter of how many of those hats can you wear.
One throat to choke.
Yeah.
Yeah, at Notre Dame we have I have 4 product managers on my team and then me. So of the 5 of us, we manage a bunch of different services and service offerings, but there are hundreds of other offerings and products that are in play that have various levels of support and complexity. And we can't possibly manage centrally all of those things. So just like we have a central project management office, we are, but those folks can't manage every project. So other people have to be trained to be qualified project managers, and you might be an engineer, you might be a BA person, it doesn't matter. You might be called or tapped to be a project manager. So I'm working on training up more and more staff across our IT organization on how to be product managers in their areas. It's not a full-time job for them. It's just part of how they manage and deliver the services they have. And I see Hillary mentions the question, why are we introducing the term product? And I speak to that. That's actually a really common question, something that Mary Beth and I debated a lot over the last couple of years, because I use that to differentiate between a service and a service offering. And product is applying some of those principles and best practices that you have in a commercial setting, which tends to be a lot more user-focused, vendor-based, communications, marketing, user feedback side than what, at least in our organization, where a service owner or a service offering owner or a service manager, those kinds of terms have very traditionally been focused on, am I applying all the patches? What's my uptime? What's the technology stack? We have at Notre Dame, we have 200 plus really smart technologists. And then sometimes we fall down on remembering that we're delivering this to users, and users are why we're delivering these things. So one of my favorite quotes is from Ken Norton, who's now at Google Ventures. And the quote says that your job as a product manager, your job is to represent whoever's not currently in the room. So as an advocate for whoever's not in the room, which is usually people in the room are engineers, they're technologists, they're security, sometimes they're the business or the legal or the finance folks. But so often we don't have end users in the room on these project teams working with us. And who's speaking up for them at the end of the day?
I think the panelists already addressed this, but just want to see if there's any further elaboration. Mike Williams, University of Minnesota, is asking, is this a fully funded position, product manager or service owner, or is it just, like you said, multiple hats? It could be BA or somebody fulfilling these roles.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's very institution specific, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I
or
got
BM,
shifted
BRM,
into my
someone's saying.
role, and I got shifted into a new position, and 2 or 3 products that I managed before just came along with me, and others have kind of evolved in the space. And I'm hoping in a few years' time, a big part of my job goes away because it becomes more a part of the common way we do business. So I think it's evolutionary. And as far as parsing terminology, I think, it's whatever works for you. I don't get down to that hair splitting level.
Okay,
And I think
go ahead, please.
and I think in a lot of organizations, you're going to find that it's taking someone's current role and changing a little bit, and maybe changing the structure or strategy of it, but still utilizing people who are in those roles. So if you think of someone as the person in charge of a service offering, like the person in charge of the box service on campus, Chaz will describe him as a product manager. But I think traditionally what a lot of organizations or not traditionally, but increasingly what a lot of organizations are doing is they're taking that person who might be a more technology or systems focused person just in charge of keeping box running, and sort of educating him and having him grow his role and say, you're not just in charge of keeping the things running, keeping the lights on, but having some kind of broader question about the service and how well it's doing, and reviewing metrics and understanding that your job is also to make sure that your end users are happy with that box service, regardless of what other sharing or collaboration services you've got going on. You're focused on box, and the world of box is yours, and you got to make it work, not just the technology, but the user engagement and user satisfaction side of things as well. And so it's often taking that person who's in that role already and expanding their purview, and that might require some training, and it might require taking other things off their plate, but it's not necessarily going to have to be a full-time role for every single offering manager.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that example that Chaz gave earlier where, it's not my job. I'm keeping it running. What do you mean?
Yeah.
And it's changing that mindset as much as anything, as to, no, it is your job to be in the head of the user, or the people using the services, and understanding that and bringing that perspective into managing the product or the service.
These are all great comments. If you mind, let's move on to the next question here. We got about 10 minutes or so, then we'll open up for additional question and answer. So who or what makes a good service owner or product manager?
I have another favorite quote from Ken Norton on this one. I have this hanging up on my wall, and it is, product management is a weird discipline full of oddballs and rejects that never quite fit in anywhere else. And I love that because that adequately describes me and everybody on my team. where we have this weird mix of skills and backgrounds and seeing where they fit into IT, which is increasingly specialized, and finding people who are generalists and have this knack for, as Mary Beth noted, communication and translating between engineers and customers and finance. Todd's point here is very much is less IT and more soft skills. It's change management. It's emotional intelligence. It's understanding that this is going to wreck your life because I changed your email system, and that is the worst thing I could possibly have done to you. And sitting down and letting you chew me out for the morning, but in the end of the day, you feel better about what you have, and that somebody cares, and I understand. But also hearing that, ingesting it, taking it back to the team, and making sure that everybody from our communications to engineers to the support teams understand what that need is. And so my background was in marketing with a lot of technology. I was a Japanese major in college, so somehow that's useful. But I also have somebody who has a PhD in theology. I have a guy who ran a rare books sales business. Lots of different background. I had a Marine trainer for 20 years, or Air Force trainer. He would kill me if I said Marines and he heard
Oops.
Yeah, oops. Sorry, Marty. So the point is that there's a lot of backgrounds that can come from it, and some of them are coming out of people who are traditional IT. One of the guys ran our data center for 10 years. We're moving away from having an on-prem data center and more in the cloud. He's transitioned out of running a data center facility, and it turns out he's fantastic with customers. He can present in a room, and he's got that sensitivity to be able to handle that wide range.
I like to, so a lot of my focus is on, and responsibilities around services that are vended services. So I tell the vendors I'll be your biggest fan and your biggest critic. I am very hard on them, but I will also work tirelessly to share my experiences with other institutions and that sort of thing, and not sugar the pill. I think it's important that we are in the direction of the vendor, a tireless champion for our users and their needs and our needs as an enterprise. And then in the other direction, we've got this service, and we want to make sure that people really understand how to use it, how to make the most out of it, and get the best ROI for our institution on that service. So that's what I see as kind of in a nutshell, the really strong necessary skills for this position.
So I see there's a lot of you that are responsible for working with vendors and cloud services, as I read over your bios, which leads into our last question. So how is product or service ownership changing to deal with these cloud services?
Well, we're giving up control. So we're giving up control of our data in a lot of cases, giving up control of the UI, the change management, those things. So we really have to engage very closely and really get on the same wavelength with the vendors so that we can, our users could care less. It's funny, for years now we've been doing Box at IU, and a lot of our users think it's a service that was developed by IU because it's not as well known as Dropbox in the consumer space. Yeah. That's okay with me if they feel that way, because it means we're doing a good job of making it seem like a seamless service. Yeah. But as we deal with all these cloud vendors, I think that is a very critical part of the job description.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that part of the shift means that we deal less with the specific technology of it. So you don't care, if you're managing Box, you're not worrying about patching applications and security patches and patching servers and managing the infrastructure. What there is to care about is features and functionality, and is it easy to use? Does it integrate well with other services? Does it have the latest and greatest things that people need and want? Is it mobile friendly? I mean, all the things that your end users care about become the things that you're caring about more directly, and you're spending more of your time focused on that. So I think that's a real positive shift as more things move to the cloud. So the things you care about are the things that are value to the end users, and they're things that you can track pretty well. You know, how well does Box work, and does it work? Does it do the things it's supposed to do? You know, does it have all the features that people want from and talk about Dropbox or Google Drive, and how easy is it to access those things?
I would also add, and I think that's spot on, Ricardo. I would also add that your end users in this type of relationship are also your help desk, your enterprise administrative needs, that sort of thing. So you're championing those to the vendor as well. It's got to be, you know, we're running hundreds of services. It's got to have a low footprint. It can't be high maintenance. And so we have to champion that perspective too.
Right.
I think another. No, go ahead, Ricardo.
And there are still obviously technology implications. So part of ease of use and value of something like Box is it's behind your SSO. So there's going to be some kind of integration happening with your environment. So there are technical implications. You want Box to play nice with your infrastructure, and your job as the service owner is to make sure that happens and to facilitate that. And so there's still a technology footprint or impact in your organization. Now, obviously, you know, you care about the load that the network is going to be that much more important, because that's the vital link between your users and your service. So there's a technology implication, but it's driven by end user functionality and end user features that people want. You know, ease of use for one, like SSO, and availability, so it impacts your network.
Yeah, and that's sort of where I was going to go, and also to say that these vendors tend to provide some pretty good documentation and training videos and that type of thing. And I find that one of the things that that I can do to bring value is expose those things to our users, and then supplement them with the information that they need to know how what we're doing may be a little different, or maybe augmented to what the vendor provides directly. So it's leveraging the things that are provided to us by the cloud vendor, but enhancing them and making them more useful, more valuable to people on campus.
Yeah, one of the things that we find ourselves doing is trying to play therapist a little bit for our users, because I don't have a lot of control over what some of our vendors are going to develop or what they're not going to develop. There are top feature requests that our users have that I can guarantee the vendor will never ever deliver, and we can tell them that. I have to do my best to try to make them feel better. One of my team went so far as he was working with the administrative assistance group, this training group for them, and he went so far as to buy chocolate bars, Hershey bars, printed out custom labels, and it said, in case of emergency, follow the directions on the back. And on the back, it was step 1, eat the chocolate. Step 2, give us a call and we will help you. Because we understand that what happens is sometimes out of our control, and our job is to help bridge the gap. And if the feedback needs to get back to the vendor, then we provide it to the vendor. And I know that most of us are on multiple advisory boards and serving in going to meetups, and when we can, maintaining that relationship with the vendor. And every time I see one of those points about, hey, you know, we don't want to work with such and such vendor because it's impossible to get a hold of somebody, I think then you started trying to do this maybe a little too late. When you have an issue is the wrong time to start trying to forge a relationship. Like, because I know I can reach somebody at one of these big vendors.
Or the other thing is you approach it as an us versus them kind of thing, and try to make the relationship be more of a partnership. It works a whole lot better. and you can be, like Bob said, your best friend and your harshest critic, you know. So.
Okay. We have Dave from University of Utah. He's asking a general question to the panelists. So is there a rule of thumb for how many products or services a product manager, service owner can manage and still be effective?
Again, I think it's so dependent on the service and the portfolio of responsibilities for that individual. So, someone could be a service owner of a number of services, but not in that sort of product management or service offering, deeply sort of involved with the technology role. But if the same person is doing all those things, then obviously they're going to be able to handle a fewer number of services. I think it's another one of those, it depends.
We find ourselves grouping our products together close to services. And if you don't have somebody who's doing that service owner role thoroughly, even if somebody has their name in that box in the org chart or on your service catalog, if they're not doing that holistically, the product manager who does it holistically often will end up doing all of those things. So our storage team focused one way, our product manager who ends up doing more and more of the cloud storage pieces, Google Drive, Box, and so on, he finds himself becoming the de facto service owner around storage, despite having a team that is dedicated to just storage, because the role that they play becomes relegated to just maybe the offering within it. And Simon, you're asking, I guess, about, do you assign products owned by service or spread it around? And that's kind of what I was speaking to. We try to keep them grouped because there's so much. A product manager should know what's in that category, what the competitors are doing, what all the offerings are. And so it seems natural from our standpoint to keep them together.
Brian is asking a really good question. He's asking, for a service like email, does the responsibility for managing the product or understanding capabilities and future roadmap reside in the systems team, for which traditionally like an email administrator, or how is it making that shift to service and product owners where they're responsible for multiple service offerings like email or Box or those things that do the same kinds of things?
So let me try. I was going to type an answer, but since we're going there, I'll speak the answer. As speaking as an organization that's kind of going through this specific growing pain right now, because we're on-prem Exchange for faculty and staff, we've got students on Google, and we're evaluating Office 365 to move our Exchange off-prem. Well, it's actually a different group it's our Office 365 team that is looking at the email evaluation or leading the email evaluation, and would probably ultimately be the service owner because they've already got the rest of Office 365, and moving it away from our traditional Exchange team who also has some of the underlying infrastructure like AD and that sort of thing. So I don't suspect there's a simple answer to this. We're certainly seeing some growing pains around it right now. And part of it is just this shakedown of what the cloud world means to you. So the current Exchange team, they're the ones building the servers, all of that. You don't really need a sysadmin when you're managing your email in Office 365. You need a completely different type of role. So we've seen that. I guess that's a very long answer to I don't think there's one answer. What do the others say?
Well, I've seen a lot of organizations work with the people who traditionally have the skills and expertise in, say, managing Box, people in the storage area, they're the ones who are working on Box, or the sysadmins managing the various different email offerings as the either product owners or maybe the offering manager at that local level. And then someone who has either a longer historical knowledge or a somewhat senior level as the service owner, so they can have a wider, a broader picture, a broader view of things. And when you have in that model, when you've got someone who, say, has been managing the Exchange service for a long time, part of the challenge is getting them to think about it beyond just the technology, not just keeping your Exchange server up, but all the things we're talking about, user satisfaction and the things that make that service offering valuable beyond just the technology. But it often starts with people in their own silos, and then branching out their areas of interest and responsibilities. What often happens, though, I really want to make, is that the collection of your service offering managers or service owners and how they interact with each other will necessarily cut across the org chart. And so there are I know IT shops love to reorg and, reshuffle the decks. And, we have, reorganizations all the time. And so there's some method to the madness there, but that doesn't have to dictate how the service offering owners are related to each other. I've seen it for a lot of cases where there is a service owner for email, say, and one of the email offerings is an infrastructure because it was Exchange and it's all the traditional AD-based, Exchange on-premise. And another offering was Gmail, and that was maintained by the people in academic technology, academic computing, because it was spun up by them for students and faculty. And so that was why you had different parts of the org chart, representing email, but it didn't matter because they were all under the same service umbrella.
I'd also say that I think that this is an opportunity to develop people who are in more traditionally system administrator roles and so on into other roles, these roles that are going to become more important as we move things more to the cloud, because the cloud services, again, we're not racking and stacking them anymore. Instead, we're working with the users to make sure their needs are being met by the services that the providers, and working with the vendors to lobby on behalf of our users and so on. So, people may start in these traditionally technical roles, but I think this is a good opportunity for career development and career growth into these areas that are going to just become more and more important.
Well, this has been a great discussion. We're running out of time. I'm going to share the panelists' email address. You can see it here on the PowerPoint slide. They're willing to allow you to contact them offline if you have further questions or comments. A lot of good questions coming in. Unfortunately, we don't have time to address them. Again, I want to thank Bob and Mary Beth and Ricardo and Chaz for taking some time out to talking with our audience today. This is great, great, great stuff. I'm definitely going to go back and listen to this recording. So we're always looking for fresh ideas. So if you have an idea for a webinar or desire to present, please contact myself or Bob Black through the ITSM listserv. We also have the product management group involved as well. So I'm sure Chaz would love to hear any ideas that you might have. Just a reminder that this presentation is being recorded, and I will post it on the ITSM Wiki site within 5 business days. I'll make sure, Chaz, you get a copy as well. To view any upcoming or past recordings, please visit our website, the Wiki site. And thank you so much. Have the good rest of the day. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.